Episode 4 of Apothecary Diaries. And we're starting off with the confirmation that this is the Emperor. I mean, once again, we see the dragon symbol on the chest. That's quite indicative. And what's interesting is that Emperor is literally doing Emperor thing in this one brief moment that he shows up. That actually feels very, very Emperor-like. You know, asking one of your concubines' maid to help your other concubine. It's such a power move of an emperor because you're a head of a country and you're an absolute monarch. So by and large, you can't really play too much favoritism to one person or the other. You have to show that you don't have a favorite. Otherwise, you become predictive. So there's actually quite a lot of politics involved just in this one scene and one action alone of the emperor asking Mao Mao to treat Li Hua, who's still sick. And then we see what Mao Mao actually prepared for Li Hua, which is a lot of fruit and vegetables. Right off the bat, there are some easy ones to tell. You can see the banana, that's obviously easy to tell what it is. Green apple, that's also easy. And you can see the chestnut, it's pretty common. And then we move on to some of the fruits that are a little bit uncommon. For example, on the upper right corner, you see some walnuts. I mean, walnuts are not that uncommon, but in the lower right corner, what you see is loquat, which is actually a fruit grown in East Asia. It has a certain kind of aroma. It's kind of similar to a persimmon, but not exactly. Very hard to describe. The consistency feels like an apricot, but the taste is between a persimmon and apricot and a banana. And it has some medicinal value. It reduces cough. If you eat it, people actually make a tonic out of it by boiling it down to a syrup form. And then if you look at the lower left corner, we have this citrusy kind of fruit, which is the yuzu, which has actually originated in China when the Chinese actually crossed Mandarin orange and Yichang papaya, so basically Yichang orange together. It's citrusy, it's actually not very sweet, there's a bit of sourness to it. Not as sour as lemon, but still a bit of sourness. It's actually more used for flavor rather than eating because it's not very juicy. It doesn't really taste that good when eating, but it has health benefit. Essentially, it helps people stay alert. It also is a very high source of vitamin C. And then once again, in the middle, I'm pretty sure the author is very into lychee because they showed it right in the middle, and that's lychee. We saw in episode 2, the country is actually named after this, and then this is front and center. Then on the right side of it, we see a dish, which I can only assume is peanut. It could be pine cone, but like pine nut generally will be a little bit smaller than this. But then again, if it's really small lychee, then this might be pine nut. And then on the very far right side in the middle, we see like half a dish of pistachio. And then on the very far left side, it looks like lotus root, which I'm gonna assume is lotus root. Lotus root is actually quite nutritious. Once again, it's starchy, it has fiber, it helps you build up stamina. Then there's another pet peeve about this show is that we have this sliding window, which is very, very modern, actually. Like, it's a pretty modern invention, this kind of upward sliding window. The windows in the model, I think they use a 3D model for the backdrop. But the way they modeled it, it doesn't look like it's gonna open up. Interestingly enough, we're shown with this scene where Mao Mao sliding up the window, meaning that it's a sliding window. That wasn't the thing in Asia, at least like the vertical sliding window, because you need to be able to hold it up once you slide it up, and traction generally wouldn't be that great, and it's gonna be very easily damaged. Usually traditional Asian windows are either horizontally sliding window or they're push opens, so they're not like this. And then basically what this episode is Mao Mao getting Li Hua back to health, Mao Mao being basically the boss of the place, But once again, some of the background decorations, the shapes are okay. Decoration details, very, 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 uncanny. For example, the lantern in the back again, with the wedding symbol on top. She's married to the emperor for a very long time already. They had one kid who died, and she's sick right now, yet the lantern has a wedding symbol on it. It makes no sense in the cultural context, but I guess it looks remotely Chinese, so they just kept it. But what's interesting is that they actually built a steam bath in the palace. Well, steam bath was a thing in China, but unlike sauna, steam bath was specifically used for treatment rather than for bathing, just everyday bathing. It's actually specifically used for treatment. You build a steam bath, you go in, you actually steam, and you add in certain herbs. The most common one being a moxie plant. And you burn it. Generally, the kind of steam goes in, and it's believed to help you actually feel better. So in a sense, this is accurate. Chinese did use steam baths, but specifically for treatment, not for everyday bathing. For everyday bathing, there are two kinds of baths, a larger bath pool, which is a hole in the ground that you fill hot water in, which we have plenty of examples throughout history. The most famous one actually in Chang'an. And we have many modern bathhouses, especially in the more northern part of China where winter gets very cold, and generally individual house heating wasn't that affordable for a very long time, and for people to keep warm, they just built these bathhouses where you go into and there's a hot tub. For everyday single family purpose though, usually throughout history, Chinese people use a wooden bucket, person-sized bucket for bath. Essentially a bathtub, but usually a wood. Sometimes, you add water into the wooden bucket, you can actually heat it up with a furnace below, essentially heating up the water inside to keep it warm. So that's essentially how people take baths in China. And what do you know? This actually works, and Li Hua's better. Then we get to Mao Mao actually teaching Li Hua about the sexy stuff, which actually, interestingly enough, this is a thing. This was a thing in Imperial Palace, because more often than not, people who actually become the emperor's concubines never really had any experience prior. So they had no idea where babies come from. And if the emperor is young enough, the emperor probably had no idea where babies come from. And since they didn't have internet back then, somebody need to teach them. So essentially these kind of responsibilities were actually put on some of the noblewomen who were married, had kids, and then they kind of went into the imperial palace as female officials and so on. And their sole job was to teach all the concubines and sometimes even the emperor, essentially health and phys ed. So Mao Mao's actually filling in that role, which is somewhat bizarre because usually, married women will do that. But I guess since she grew up on a red light district, that makes sense. Still, it makes you question why they didn't have, actual married women who fill that role in the first place, because there were supposed to be ones that did that. And yeah, there's a lot of detail about these kind of things. Although Chinese culture was quite conservative, being the now second largest population on the planet after India, and for most time of human history being the most populous nation on the planet, Chinese culture might be conservative, but when it comes to producing babies, we're not really bad at it. Let's put it that way. And that's about all the interesting part in this episode. Next episode is much more interesting actually, because they're preparing for an event essentially. And the way they're preparing for an event actually once again showcases is a lot of cultural background and a lot of interesting cultural aspect. So that wraps up the appendix for episode 4 of Apothecary Diaries. Stay tuned for episode 5. As I was saying, there's a lot of content actually in episode 5. More so than this episode in particular, which is just once again one isolated individual episode that basically wraps things up by itself.